Hello everyone. It is Tina with Picture It Personal Finance. I am a financial coach that helps working professionals and solopreneurs better manage their money so that they can pursue the future and the business that they really want. A huge element of what is sort of on my heart to serve people with is helping individuals who feel trapped in a career that they no longer like or a business that they no longer like, and helping them transform into a second career or transform their business into something that they can really appreciate. You put all this effort and build all this momentum toward a career path that you really want, and then you realize when you get there that it's not what you want at all, but you feel trapped. I am here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way. And what really sparked this video for me was a conversation my husband had recently with a friend of his. This friend of his essentially stated that it is impossible today for the average, middle America family to live off of a single income. I'm not sure I believe this to be true, and I want to spend this video talking about this because I suspect there are a lot of people who believe this and maybe could use to have their eyes opened up. I think there is a bigger truth at play here, and I just want to highlight that. And if you stick around to the end, I will give you sort of a synopsis of what are 3 big tips that you could do to get yourself in a position where you could be a single income household. Before I go any further in this video, I have to say that I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with women in the workforce, and I actually think it was one of the best things that could have happened for society, and I will tell you why. I have heard so many men, and it's almost always men, who say that American culture or culture in general eroded once women joined the workforce, but I think that is bullcrap. Prior to that, it was highly common for men to be physically and financially abusive toward their spouses. I'm not going to say that was absolutely in every single household, but it was completely normalized for a man to spank his wife. Maybe I will plug a picture in here if I can find it, of ads where you can literally see a man spanking his wife in the print ad of like the 1940s. So this idea that a man was in charge of every aspect of a woman's life kind of is true. It wasn't really until women were able to join the workforce that they had a greater sense of independence to lay claim to how they wanted their life to unfold. And I believe that there were many abusive circumstances in America, but probably across the whole world, and goodness knows there's still many out there today, where women were prohibited from leaving an abusive situation because they had no income, they had no money of their own, they had no way of making a life for themselves. So they had to stick it out. In the 1960s, you see the baby boomer generation joining the workforce in larger numbers. And at that time, about 41% of women of working age were participating in the labor force. This percentage of women being in the labor force goes up to approximately 60% by the year 2000, and then we start to see a drop off after that. If we know that in the 1960s, this is when women, especially working moms, were joining the workforce in higher percentages, and that trajectory increased all the way through to the year 2000, then really we ought to look at the 1950s as that sort of, golden era of what the traditional American family looked like. So I'm going to look at some information about the 1950s, and then we're going to talk about what changed. So in 1950, and I will kind of look down at my notes here a little bit, but in 1950, the median house cost $18,000. In 2020 dollars, that's $200,000. So on average, you can imagine that the median house that was purchased in 2020 was $200,000. The average cost of milk, a gallon of milk, was 93 cents. You guys, in today's dollars, that is $10. They were paying approximately $10 for a gallon of milk. The reason food ends up becoming much less expensive has to do with factory farming. Factory farming wasn't pervasive in the 1950s, and I personally believe the quality of food in the 1950s was much better than the quality of food we have today. But food actually costs a lot less today than it did back then. The price of a car, and I specifically looked at a Ford, was $3,000. People would be like, oh, you could buy a car for $3,000, but you have to remember that back then, the average income was $4,100 for a year. The median income in 1955 was $4,100. So this would be like saying that they were buying a car for $32,000 and they were making $47,000 a year. Incidentally, the last time I looked, the median income in America today is $55,000. So people actually make more money today than they made back then when you adjust it for inflation. Mind you, I wasn't looking for the current inflation spell that we're under. I know we've got some very intense inflation happening right now, given that it is July of 2022. But if we look at comparatively over the last couple of years, I'm kind of doing the average inflation rate of like 3.5% from 1955 until today. Okay, so if you think about that, people were spending about $32,000 on a car, they were spending about $200,000 on a house, and milk was costing $10 a gallon. If you think about that by comparison today, that's not really that different. Right? So then the question becomes, if it's not that different, then where are the differences? Why does it feel like as though you can't live off of one income today, whereas before they could easily live off of one income? One of the biggest things that I realized when I was doing this research that is the difference between 1950s and today is debt. The average household debt in the beginning of the 1950s was essentially zero. Debt really wasn't a problem back then. I couldn't understand it, to be candid with you. I mean, I know that I'm talking about consumer debt, by the way, so they were borrowing for their house, but there was very little debt in terms of, well, to be candid, in terms of personal loans and credit cards. As a matter of fact, I did a little research on that and I found out that the first credit card was invented in 1958, and I should call it a general purpose card. And they did not become prevalent until the 1980s. As a matter of fact, the Federal Reserve did not start tracking consumer credit debt until 1980, because it was in 1980 that the magnetic strip. So you guys know on the back of your credit card, and most people do the chip reader now, but there's also that magnetic strip that you can use if the chip reader is malfunctioning. That magnetic strip was invented in the 1980s. So it was in the 1980s that the credit cards really took off, the general purpose credit card. Now, the average American consumer debt today is $92,000, which kind of is crazy to me. So I just want to highlight that is probably, I mean, besides food did really surprise me that food costs were actually double in 1950 what they are today. But the average American household in the 1950s had zero debt, zero consumer debt. And today we have quite a lot of consumer debt. So it brings me back to the question and the conversation we were having at the beginning of this video. If we wanted to talk about how could we make it possible for people today to be able to live off a single household, what can we learn from the 1950s household? The number one thing that we can learn is that they had no debt. So pay off your debt. As best as you can, pay off your debt. Try to get rid of all consumer debt, especially credit card debt. That is not going to serve you, and it is eating up the money that you have coming in. It's like you've chosen to buy things today and pay for it later. Well, the needing to pay for it later is preventing you from being able to pursue the career that you really want, or preventing you from being a stay-at-home parent. Or two, buy a smaller house. I didn't really dig into this, but the last thing that I saw was that the median cost of a house in America as of in 2022, I want to say is about $300,000. So that's up from the inflation adjusted $200,000 house that we saw common in the 1950s. Part of the reason that's happening is because our houses are bigger now. They were much smaller in their footprint. The average home in 1950 was 982 square feet. The average home today is 2,300 square feet. You think about the additional cost that would introduce in maintaining the home, utilities for the home. The other thing that really struck me, when you look at houses that are built from the 1950s and the 1960s even, how little closet space they have, which just kind of lends itself to the idea of we are an over-consuming society. So if you had a smaller house, you would fill it with fewer things, right? You wouldn't want it to be so cluttered. So that's number 2 recommendation, right? Number 1, avoid debt, pay off debt if you have it. Number 2, downsize your house if at all possible. And then downsize the amount of stuff that you have in that house to better reflect the new size of home that you have. And then the last one is cars. Now, the average car back then did cost $32,000 when you do the inflation adjusted dollars. But most households in 1950 had 0 to 1 car, right? So the cars, inflation adjusted, cost about the same that they do today, but households had no car or 1 car. The vast majority, 80%. I want to say, I'm going off of memory right now, I'm confident that 80% of households had 0 to 1 car. However, what I can't remember is how many had 0. And I think it might have been like 30% of households had 0 car. And then that would mean that 50% of households only had 1 car. And then, the remaining 20% would have 3 or more cars at their disposal. So when you think about that right there can be a tremendous cost savings, especially when you think about gas, you think about maintaining the vehicle, you think about insurance for the vehicle, you think about storage, like having to have a bigger garage if you have multiple vehicles and you want them to be indoors, things like this. So those are the 3 big ticket items or tips that I can give you in terms of trying to better mimic what was done in the 1950s so that you can better mimic that lifestyle. Yeah, there you have it. If you cut out your debt, really dramatically pay it down, if you reduce the size of home that you have, and if you reduce the number of cars that you have, you can absolutely afford to reduce down to a single income. And whether you choose for that to be a permanent reduction so that one person can stay at home with the kids and just maintain the home, that's completely up to you. Or if you're doing it as a mechanism to do that career shift, it is absolutely possible for you. So don't fall into the lie that it is impossible for a successful household to exist off of 1 income. You can do it. You just have to make some lifestyle choices. So there you have it, guys. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. And remember, if this is the sort of stuff that you want to work out for you individually, feel free to reach out to me. I am taking clients, and you can look at the links below in the description box to find out how you can work with me. You guys have a great day, and I will see you in the next one.